There's nothing more frustrating than working on creative projects and not being happy with the end result. After all your hard work, you want to love what you've created. During this video, I'll show you some tips, tricks, and techniques on how I create signs with no bleeding. Number one tip when creating your signs is to prep your boards. When I prep my boards, I usually use my palm sander, but if you don't have a palm sander, you can use a medium or soft grit sandpaper, and you want to run over along the grain of your sign and make sure that you don't have any rough texture. I'm using a piece of pine for this sign. And then you want to make sure to remove all the dust. Tip number two is painting your background. First thing you're going to do is you're going to paint along the grain, and once your background's dry, we're going to do another quick sand over our whole background color. Step number three is making sure that your vinyl is pushed down firmly to your board. I'm going to use an old gift card and run it along my vinyl, make sure that it's pressed down firmly. If you'd like to see how I applied my stencil to my board, you can watch my DIY wood sign video on my channel. Tip number four was a game changer once I discovered how effectively this worked when working on my signs. I didn't want to have any bleeding, and so my tip is to use your background color as your first sponge layer when using your stencil. So I'm going to take the gray that I actually painted my background with, and I'm going to go over my stencil. And it really doesn't matter if you do a thin coat or a thick coat. What this is going to do is it's going to seal the edges along the outline of your font. It's typically your first layer of paint that bleeds underneath when you do your sponging over or you're painting over your lettering. And this is going to seal your edges so that when you do your actual font color, any bleeding that's going to take place is going to be the actual background color, so you're not actually going to see it. It seems a little bit silly to be painting the same color as the background, but it really does help keep the bleeding out. I've seen lots of tips online about using Mod Podge or other sealants instead of painting the base coat, and I find this more cost effective than buying another product that I don't really use for any other types of crafting in my studio, and I find this works really, really well. So now I'm going to let this dry, and once it's dry, I'm going to actually paint the color of the font that I want to show up on my sign, which in this case is a nice bright yellow. Now that my sponged over base color is dry, I'm going to take the color that I actually want to show up in my font, which in my case is a mustard yellow color. And I'm going to very lightly with a makeup sponge, which is my fifth tip, is just to use a makeup sponge instead of a paintbrush. I'm just using a little bit of spare space I have here to blot off some of my color, and I'm going to make a couple of light passes over my lettering. I'm not getting full coverage the first time. I just want to apply lightly. Too much paint isn't really necessary. You notice that I usually kind of start off of my letters a little bit and then kind of work my way onto them. Now I've done one pass over of my lettering, and I'm going to start back where I started and just do a second pass. My lettering's not dry yet, but that's okay. I'm just going to run over and kind of fill in my letters a little bit more. I want a nice crisp lettering on this, not a rustic look, so I'm going to make sure that my lettering's nice and bold. Now I'm going to remove my stencil, and my paint is still a little bit wet, so I'm just going to be careful while I pull this off. Once I get the large section of vinyl off, I'm just going to use my pin and take out all the centers of all of my letters. Just in case you're wondering, I live in Canada and this is how we spell favorite. As you can see, this was a really effective way, and using the background color will really make sure that you have no bleeding. This is pretty much as no bleed as it possibly gets when making signs. Thanks for watching my video. If you like my videos, please paint that like button blue for me. Comment in the section below if you have any tips and tricks on how to have no bleeding when creating signs. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.